Black siblings' startup innovation attracts global attention. The sound of glass shattering echoed through the conference room. Malcolm Thomas stared at the broken award on the floor, his hands trembling. The room had gone completely silent, 50 investors, tech journalists, and industry leaders frozen in shock. His sister Diane stood motionless beside him, documents scattered at her feet, her carefully applied makeup now streaked with tears. "You lied to us," Malcolm said, his voice barely above a whisper but cutting through the silence like a knife. "All this time." Their mentor and primary investor, Walter Green, a distinguished man in his 70s, reached toward them. "Kids, please, this isn't what you think. Don't call us kids," Diane snapped, years of built-up respect crumbling in an instant. "We trusted you with everything, our parents' legacy, our future." Malcolm pointed to the projection screen behind them, where financial records and emails were displayed for all to see. 30 years. You stole from our parents 30 years ago, and now you are going to do the same to us. Walter's face drained of color as murmurs rippled through the audience. Phones were already recording, documenting the public implosion of what should have been the crowning achievement for MemoryCare, the healthcare technology startup that had been on the verge of revolutionizing elder care across the country. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when the Thomas siblings were preparing for the most important presentation of their lives. 3 hours earlier, sunlight streamed through the windows of the modest office space in downtown Atlanta. The walls were adorned with framed newspaper clippings and old photographs, glimpses of a family legacy built on resilience and innovation. Malcolm Thomas, 42, adjusted his tie in the reflection of his computer screen. His closely cropped hair was beginning to show flecks of gray at the temples, a fact his sister never failed to point out. 20 years in corporate America had trained him for high-pressure situations, but nothing compared to today. "You're going to wear a hole in that floor," said Diane Thomas, 38, looking up from her tablet. Unlike her brother's corporate polish, Diane had always embraced a more creative energy. Her braided updo was accented with a colorful scarf, their mother's, from the 1970s, and her bright yellow dress stood out against the office's muted tones. "Can you blame me?" Malcolm replied, checking his watch, a vintage Omega his father had worn during his medical practice in the 1980s. "Everything we've worked for comes down to the next 3 hours." Their office was modest, but deliberate, a converted warehouse space in a historically black neighborhood that was fighting against gentrification. The Thomas siblings had been adamant about keeping their roots in the community where their parents had established their medical practice decades earlier. Dr. Patricia and William Thomas Free Clinic read a black-and-white photograph on the wall, their parents standing proudly in front of a small building in 1978, surrounded by community members. "Mom and Dad would be proud," Diane said, following Malcolm's gaze to the photograph. "From neighborhood doctors to a healthcare technology that could help millions." Malcolm nodded, touching the frame gently. 3 years of work. All those nights converting Dad's patient notes and Mom's care methods into an algorithm. MemoryCare had begun as a simple idea, digitizing their parents' approach to elder care, particularly for dementia and Alzheimer's patients. Their parents had developed innovative methods for memory retention and quality of life improvements long before such approaches became mainstream. The Thomas siblings had combined Malcolm's business acumen and Diane's expertise in artificial intelligence to create a platform that would revolutionize in-home elder care. "Walter's bringing the final contracts for the Series B funding today," Malcolm said, referring to Walter Green, their primary investor and mentor. Walter had been a friend of their parents back in the day, one of the few white doctors who had collaborated with black physicians during the more segregated medical community of the 1970s. 30 million, Diane whispered, still hardly believing it. "From a prototype we built in our spare bedroom to 30 million in funding." A gentle knock interrupted them. James Cooper, their 68-year-old office manager, poked his head in. James had been their first hire, a retired hospital administrator who had worked with their parents and who now handled the practical aspects of running a startup that two technical people often overlooked. "The caterers are here," James announced, "and I've set up the demonstration stations just like you asked." He entered, his gait slightly slowed by arthritis, but his mind sharp as ever. He wore a cardigan sweater despite the Georgia heat, a habit he claimed came from decades in over-air-conditioned hospitals. "What would we do without you, James?" Diane smiled. "Probably forget to eat and miss half your meetings," he replied with a wink. Just like your father used to do, that man could diagnose the rarest conditions but couldn't remember his own lunch hour. Malcolm checked his phone. Any word from Clara? Clara Johnson was their lead programmer, a brilliant 72-year-old who had been coding since the days of punch cards and who had come out of retirement specifically to work on MemoryCare. She had been instrumental in creating algorithms that were actually accessible to older users. "She's downstairs helping set up the demo stations," James replied. "Said something about making last-minute adjustments to improve the interface contrast. Always perfecting," Diane smiled. "That's why we love her. The press has started arriving," James added. "And some of the investors, too. Atlanta Business Chronicle, Tech Futures, even that reporter from the National Healthcare blog." Malcolm took a deep breath. "This is it then." "Wait," Diane said, reaching into her desk drawer. She pulled out a small wooden box with intricate carvings. "Dad's lucky charm." She opened it to reveal a smooth stone with the word persevere painted on it. Their father had carried it through medical school in the 1960s, through all the discrimination and obstacles placed in his way. "He'd want it with us today," she said, placing it in Malcolm's palm. Malcolm closed his fingers around the stone, feeling its smooth surface, worn from years of their father's touch during difficult moments. "Let's go make history," he said. The presentation space downstairs had been transformed. The usually sparse work area now featured demonstration stations where attendees could interact with the MemoryCare platform. Digital displays showed the interface that would soon be in thousands of homes, helping families care for elderly loved ones with memory conditions. Clara Johnson stood by the main demonstration table, her silver hair cut in a practical bob, her posture still remarkably straight for her age. She wore a blouse with a pattern that looked straight out of 1975, paired with practical slacks and comfortable shoes. Her fingers moved across the tablet with surprising dexterity as she made final adjustments. "There you are," she called when she spotted the siblings. "I've made it even better. The voice recognition now accounts for tremors and the slowdown patterns common in older speech." Malcolm smiled. This was why they had sought Clara out of retirement. She brought not just technical expertise but lived experience to their product development. "You're a miracle worker, Clara," he said. "No miracles, just good science and respect for the user," she replied with a wave of her hand. "Unlike those youngsters making apps these days, assuming everyone has perfect vision and steady hands." The doors opened, and guests began to flow in. Local business leaders, tech investors, healthcare administrators, and journalists circulated through the space. Many gravitated toward Walter Green, who had just arrived and was holding court near the entrance. Walter, tall and distinguished with a full head of white hair, spotted Malcolm and Diane and made his way over. At 76, he still carried himself with the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime in positions of power. His tailored suit and monogrammed cufflinks spoke of old money and established connections. "There they are, the future of healthcare technology," Walter announced, embracing each of them in turn. "I was just telling the folks from MedTech Ventures about how you've revolutionized the interface." Malcolm noticed Walter's customary enthusiasm seemed even more pronounced today. "Everything all set for the contracts after the presentation." "All prepared," Walter assured him, patting his leather portfolio. "The lawyers have reviewed everything. After your demonstration, we sign and MemoryCare officially becomes the most promising elder care technology startup in the country." Diane glanced at her watch. 20 minutes until we begin." "I'll let you two prepare," Walter said. "This is your moment. Your parents would be bursting with pride." As Walter moved away to continue networking, James approached with a concerned expression. "Malcolm, there's someone here asking for you. Says he's from your father's old practice, a Dr. Raymond Mitchell." Malcolm and Diane exchanged glances. The name was familiar, but neither had met him. "Did Dad ever mention a Dr. Mitchell?" Diane asked. "Maybe one of his residents. He trained so many young doctors over the years," Malcolm replied. "He's waiting in the side office," James said. "Says it's important, something about your parents' research." Malcolm hesitated, looking at the growing crowd. "We don't have time right now. Can you ask him to wait until after the presentation?" James nodded and headed toward the side office while Malcolm and Diane continued greeting arriving guests. Clara approached them, tablet in hand. 10 minutes, you two. I've queued up the demonstration video and tested all the interactive elements." "Thanks, Clara," Diane said, squeezing the older woman's shoulder gently. As the minute hand ticked closer to presentation time, Malcolm felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find James with a troubled expression. "Dr. Mitchell insists on speaking with you before you begin, says it concerns the core technology you're presenting today." Malcolm frowned. What does that mean? He wouldn't tell me, just said you need to see something before you proceed. Diane joined them. What's going on? Malcolm glanced at the clock. 7 minutes to go. I'll speak to him quickly. You start greeting everyone and directing them to seats. Malcolm followed James to the side office, a small conference room they used for private meetings. Inside stood a black man in his early 70s with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a modest suit that had seen better days, and he clutched a worn leather briefcase. Dr. Mitchell, I'm Malcolm Thomas. I understand you knew my father. The man nodded solemnly. I did. I was his research partner at Emory for several years in the late 1970s and early 1980s. I've been following your company's progress. He hesitated. I saw the press release about today's event, and I felt I had to come. Malcolm glanced at his watch. I appreciate that, sir, but we're about to begin a major presentation. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting later this week. This can't wait, Dr. Mitchell said firmly. He opened his briefcase and removed a manila folder, yellowed with age. Your MemoryCare technology, it's based on your parents' research on cognitive reinforcement methodologies, correct? Malcolm nodded, increasingly uncomfortable. Yes, we digitized their approach and enhanced it with AI. And Walter Green is your primary investor. He was a colleague of my parents. Malcolm was growing impatient. Dr. Mitchell, I'm sorry, but what is this about? The older man placed the folder on the table between them. Before you sign anything with Walter Green, you need to see these documents. They're the original research papers your parents and I worked on before Walter took them and published them under his own name. Malcolm felt the room tilt slightly. What? Walter Green didn't collaborate with your parents. He stole their research that I believe forms the foundation of what you're about to sell him today. Malcolm stared at the folder, then at his watch. 3 minutes until the presentation. I need to get my sister, he said, his voice hollow. 2 minutes later, Diane stood beside him as Dr. Mitchell explained, showing them papers with their parents' handwriting experimental designs that looked eerily similar to the methods they had digitized, and damning correspondence between the research department and publishers from 1983. Why didn't our parents fight this? Diane asked, her voice shaking. They tried, Dr. Mitchell said sadly. But in 1983, a black doctor and a woman physician challenging a white department head from a wealthy family. The university sided with Walter. Your parents were devastated. They left academia and opened their community practice instead. The practice where they implemented these same methods, Malcolm realized. They continued the work just directly with patients instead. Yes, Dr. Mitchell confirmed. They never stopped believing in the approach. They just couldn't get credit for it academically. The siblings looked at each other, decades of family history suddenly reframing itself in their minds. The presentation, Diane began, is about to start, James said from the doorway. Everyone's seated. Walter is asking for you. Malcolm looked down at their parents' research, then back at his sister. A silent understanding passed between them. Dr. Mitchell, would you be willing to stay for our presentation? Malcolm asked. I came here for exactly that reason, the older man replied. They walked into the main space where 50 influential people waited. Walter stood near the podium, beaming confidently. He frowned slightly when he noticed Dr. Mitchell, a flicker of recognition crossing his face before his professional smile returned. Diane took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming today. Before we begin our demonstration of MemoryCare, my brother and I would like to share the true story behind this technology. The presentation that followed was not the one they had rehearsed. Instead, Malcolm and Diane took turns explaining their parents' original research, with Dr. Mitchell providing historical context. They displayed the documents side by side with Walter's published papers from 1984 on the large screen for all to see. Walter's face grew increasingly pale as the presentation continued. When Malcolm finally turned to address him directly, asking for an explanation, Walter attempted to dismiss the accusation as a misunderstanding. These are very old documents being taken out of context, Walter said, his voice carrying none of its usual authority. Academic collaboration is complex. I credited your parents in the acknowledgments as technical assistants, Dr. Mitchell interrupted. Not as the primary researchers who developed the methodology. Walter tried to regain control of the situation. This is hardly the venue for such a discussion. We have contracts to sign, a business to launch. That was when Malcolm had picked up the Crystal Innovation Award that had been prepared for the day's ceremony. He looked at it, then at Walter, and finally at the photograph of his parents that they had brought downstairs for the presentation. Our parents persevered despite what you did, Malcolm said. They helped thousands of patients with their methods, and now you are going to profit from their work again through us." The sound of glass shattering echoed through the conference room as the award hit the floor. "You lied to us," Malcolm said, his voice barely above a whisper but cutting through the silence like a knife. "All this time." If you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to hear more stories like this. The aftermath of the confrontation was chaos. Journalists rushed to capture statements, investors huddled in corners making urgent phone calls, and Walter Green was escorted out by his assistants, his face ashen. Malcolm, Diane, Dr. Mitchell, Clara, and James retreated to the upstairs office. The original research spread across the conference table. The revelation had hit the siblings hard, but beneath the shock was a growing determination. "All this time," Diane said, touching her mother's handwritten notes, "he was at our parents' funeral. He helped us set up this company. He knew exactly what we were building and who we were building it for." "Walter saw another opportunity," Clara said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "When you approached him with your idea to digitize your parents' methods, he must have recognized it immediately and realized he could control it again," Malcolm finished. "This time with full ownership through his investment firm." James set down cups of coffee for everyone. "So what happens now? The funding is gone, and those investors out there are probably scrambling to distance themselves from any controversy." Malcolm looked up, a slow realization dawning. "Actually, I'm not so sure." He reached for his phone and scrolled through a flurry of incoming messages. "3 of the investors who were here today want to meet with us immediately, without Walter's firm involved." Diane leaned over to see the messages. "They're interested in the technology on its own merits. And in the story," Dr. Mitchell added, "truth has power, especially in today's climate where historical injustices are finally being acknowledged." Clara had been quiet, examining the old research papers with a professional eye. "This work was truly revolutionary for its time," she said admiringly. "The cognitive reinforcement patterns your parents developed, they were decades ahead of the current literature." "Which is why our prototype has been testing so well," Diane said. "It wasn't just the technology, it was the methodology at its core." Malcolm paced the room, energy returning to his steps. "We need to regroup, immediately. The story is already getting out, my phone is blowing up with notifications." James, ever practical, took out a notepad. "First, we need legal counsel. I have a friend who specializes in intellectual property law. Second, we need to decide if we're going forward with MemoryCare as planned." "Of course we are," Diane said firmly, "but now with full recognition of our parents as the originators of the methodology." Dr. Mitchell cleared his throat. "If I may, there are still boxes of your parents' original research notes in university storage. I never had the heart to dispose of them after the department closed. With those, you could establish a clear timeline of development." Malcolm stopped pacing. "That would be invaluable, Dr. Mitchell. Thank you." A knock at the door interrupted them. James opened it to find one of the journalists from the presentation, an older woman from the healthcare technology beat. "I apologize for the intrusion," she said, "but I wanted to speak with you before publishing my story. I covered healthcare innovations in the 1980s, and I actually wrote about Dr. Green's supposed breakthroughs back then." Malcolm invited her in. "Did you know our parents?" "Not personally," the journalist admitted, "but I remember the whispers about whose work it really was, nothing that could be printed without proof, of course." She looked at the research papers spread across the table. "May I?" After examining the documents, she looked up with professional interest. "This isn't just a business story anymore. It's about setting the record straight after decades. My editor has authorized me to do an in-depth feature." After the journalist left with copies of key documents, Malcolm turned to the others. "We need to make a decision about tomorrow. The healthcare conference starts in the morning and we're scheduled to unveil MemoryCare on the main stage. Walter will be there," James pointed out. "His firm is a primary sponsor." "Good," Malcolm said, a determined edge to his voice. "I want him to be there." The next morning, the conference center buzzed with anticipation. Word had spread about the dramatic confrontation at Thomas Health Technologies, and attendance at the MemoryCare presentation was standing room only. Malcolm and Diane stood backstage, joined now by Dr. Mitchell, who had agreed to participate. Clara had worked through the night, adding a crucial new element to their presentation. "Are you ready for this?" Diane asked her brother, adjusting his tie. "As ready as Mom and Dad were when they decided to open their practice after being pushed out of academia," he replied. When they walked onto the stage, they faced not just healthcare industry professionals, but a significant media presence. Phones and cameras tracked their every move. Malcolm stepped up to the microphone first. "Good morning. Many of you have heard about yesterday's events. Today, we're here to properly introduce MemoryCare and to honor its true origins. The presentation screen behind them illuminated with a new logo. Thomas Mitchell Memory Methodology appeared above the MemoryCare product name. Diane spoke next. In 1978, doctors Patricia and William Thomas, along with Dr. Raymond Mitchell, developed a revolutionary approach to cognitive care for elderly patients suffering from memory disorders. Their work was appropriated and their contributions erased. Today, we reclaim that legacy. Dr. Mitchell joined them, providing historical context and scientific validation for the methodology. He spoke with the authority of someone who had witnessed the original development and understood its significance. Clara then demonstrated the platform, not just its technical capabilities, but how faithfully it translated the original methodology into digital form. The audience was captivated. As they concluded the presentation, Malcolm noticed Walter Green standing at the back of the room, flanked by lawyers. Their eyes met briefly before Walter turned and exited. "We are seeking new investment partners," Malcolm announced. "Partners who value innovation, historical accuracy, and ethical business practices. MemoryCare will launch as planned, but with full recognition of its creators." The response was immediate and overwhelming. By that afternoon, 6 potential investors had scheduled meetings. 3 major healthcare systems expressed interest in pilot programs. The story of the Thomas siblings reclaiming their parents' legacy had struck a chord that resonated beyond the business implications. Back at their office that evening, the core team gathered to process the whirlwind day. 4 media requests for exclusive interviews, James reported, checking his tablet. And the social media response is extraordinary. People are sharing stories of their own family's innovations that were never properly credited. Clara looked up from her computer. The technical forums are discussing the methodology itself. Medical researchers are citing your parents' original approach and comparing it to current practices. Diane sat beside Dr. Mitchell, who was showing her photographs from his time working with their parents. "I still can't believe we never knew any of this growing up." "Your parents chose to focus on the work, not the injustice," Dr. Mitchell explained. "They believed in helping people directly. The community practice allowed them to implement their methods without academic gatekeepers." Malcolm was on the phone in the corner, his expression growing increasingly serious. When he hung up, everyone looked at him expectantly. "That was our attorney," he said. "Walter's firm is threatening legal action. They're claiming ownership of MemoryCare through their initial investment contract." The room fell silent until Clara spoke up. "But they can't own the underlying methodology if it wasn't Walter's to begin with." "Exactly," Malcolm agreed. "It's going to get complicated, but our lawyer believes we have a strong case, especially with Dr. Mitchell's testimony and the original papers." "I'm prepared to speak publicly about what happened," Dr. Mitchell said firmly. "I've been silent too long." James, always practical, raised another concern. "The legal battle could take months or even years. What about the business in the meantime?" Diane had been unusually quiet, studying her parents' research notes. She looked up with sudden clarity. "We don't wait, we launch independently." "Without the Series B funding?" Malcolm asked, surprised by his usually cautious sister's boldness. "We have enough seed money to continue operations for 3 months," she explained. "And these new investor meetings could change everything. Plus," she added with a smile, "I have an idea." Diane's idea was as ambitious as it was fitting, a crowdfunding campaign that would allow the very communities their parents had served to become micro-investors in MemoryCare. "It's not just about raising capital," she explained as they developed the strategy late into the night. "It's about ownership. The communities most affected by memory disorders, especially Black and brown communities that are often underserved by healthcare technology, should have a stake in the solution." Within a week, their story had gone viral. The healthcare technology startup founded by Black siblings to digitize their parents' stolen research resonated far beyond the industry. It touched on themes of historical injustice, innovation, family legacy, and perseverance. The crowdfunding campaign launched with a video featuring Malcolm, Diane, and Dr. Mitchell explaining the history and vision of MemoryCare. Clara demonstrated the technology, focusing particularly on how it made advanced memory care accessible to communities often left behind by healthcare innovations. The response exceeded all expectations. Small investments poured in from across the country, former patients of doctors. Patricia and William Thomas contributed and shared stories of how the doctors had helped their families. Healthcare workers who had trained under the Thomases spread the word through professional networks. Walter Green's firm maintained public silence while their lawyers worked behind the scenes. A cease and desist letter arrived, followed by more threatening legal correspondence. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Malcolm and Diane sat in a downtown law office with their attorney, reviewing the latest demands from Walter's legal team. "They're offering a settlement," their lawyer explained. "Walter's firm will withdraw all claims in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement and removal of any public statements regarding the original research." "They want us to bury the truth again," Diane said, anger evident in her voice. "It would resolve the legal issues immediately," the lawyer acknowledged. "And allow you to proceed with the business." Malcolm shook his head. "At the cost of our parents' legacy. No, we keep fighting." When they returned to the office, they found James, Clara, and Dr. Mitchell gathered around a computer, expressions of disbelief on their faces. "What's happened?" Malcolm asked. James turned the screen toward them. "The crowdfunding campaign just passed $5 million. The number was staggering for a healthcare startup without traditional venture backing. Even more remarkable was the list of contributors, thousands of small investors, but also several significant contributions from unexpected sources. "Dr. Evelyn Cooper just invested $250,000, Clara pointed out. "She was a contemporary of your parents, one of the first black women to head a neurology department." Dr. Mitchell nodded in recognition. "Evelyn knew your parents well. She always suspected what Walter had done but couldn't prove it." Another large contribution came from a venture fund specifically focused on reclaiming stolen intellectual property from marginalized creators. Their accompanying message pledged legal support as well as capital. The next day brought another surprise. 3 former colleagues of Walter Green reached out independently, offering to provide testimony about the research environment in the early 1980s and Walter's pattern of appropriating others' work. As the legal battle intensified, so did media interest. Malcolm and Diane found themselves not just defending their business, but becoming reluctant symbols in a larger conversation about historical credit and intellectual justice. 1 month after the confrontation, they received an unexpected message. Walter Green wanted to meet, without lawyers present. The meeting was set at neutral ground, a private room at the city library. Malcolm and Diane arrived first, joined by Dr. Mitchell, whose presence they had insisted upon. Walter entered alone, looking noticeably aged from when they had last seen him. The confident bearing was diminished, his shoulders slightly stooped. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," he began, his voice lacking its usual authority. "We're listening," Malcolm said simply. Walter took a seat across from them. "The past month has been illuminating. Former colleagues I've known for decades won't return my calls. My firm's reputation is suffering, and the evidence you've presented is difficult to dispute." "It's the truth," Dr. Mitchell said. "Nothing more, nothing less." Walter nodded slowly. "I've come to offer a different kind of settlement, one that acknowledges the full contribution of Doctors Patricia and William Thomas to the methodology, full credit in all future publications and patent applications, a public statement from me personally, and—" He hesitated, significant compensation for the decades of academic recognition they were denied. The siblings exchanged glances. This was unexpected. "Why the change of heart?" Diane asked directly. Walter looked down at his hands. "I'm 76 years old. My reputation was everything to me, but seeing what you've built, the community response to your parents' work finally being recognized." He paused. "Perhaps it's time for the truth, however uncomfortable." Malcolm studied the man who had been both mentor and betrayer. "This isn't just about legal settlement or financial compensation. It's about historical record." "I understand," Walter said. "That's why I'm prepared to make a full statement about the original research on record for academic and historical purposes." The negotiations that followed were complex but productive. By the end of the week, a comprehensive agreement had been reached. Walter would publicly acknowledge the Thomas Mitchell methodology as the foundation of his published work from the 1980s. Academic journals would publish corrections. And most significantly, Walter's investment firm would return all ownership claims to MemoryCare while maintaining a smaller, non-controlling investment. The formal announcement came 6 weeks after the original confrontation. Malcolm, Diane, Dr. Mitchell, and Walter Green appeared together at a press conference that drew national attention. Walter spoke first, his prepared statement direct and unambiguous. "Today, I am setting the record straight on research published under my name in 1984 regarding cognitive reinforcement methodologies. This groundbreaking work was, in fact, developed by Doctors Patricia and William Thomas, along with Dr. Raymond Mitchell. I wrongfully claimed primary authorship of their innovations, and I have benefited from that claim throughout my career. The acknowledgement sent ripples through academic and medical communities. Universities began reviewing other cases of potential academic appropriation from the same era. Medical journals announced new protocols for examining authorship disputes involving historically marginalized researchers. For Malcolm and Diane, the victory was bittersweet. Their parents hadn't lived to see their work properly credited, but as MemoryCare moved forward with its launch, their legacy was finally receiving its due recognition. The product itself continued to evolve. Clara worked with Dr. Mitchell to incorporate additional elements from the original research that had never been implemented. The community investment model proved sustainable, with the initial crowdfunding converted to formal equity stakes for thousands of small investors. 3 months after the confrontation, MemoryCare launched officially with pilot programs in community health centers across 5 cities. The technology was particularly embraced in historically underserved neighborhoods, where access to specialized memory care had been limited. In the office that had once seemed too modest for their ambitions, Malcolm hung a new certification beside their parents' photograph, the official patent for the Thomas Mitchell memory methodology, with Patricia and William Thomas listed as primary inventors. They would have cared more about the patients being helped than the credit, Diane observed as they admired the framed document. True, Malcolm agreed. But the recognition matters too, for history, for other innovators who might otherwise be erased. Dr. Mitchell, who had become a regular presence at the company, nodded in agreement. Your parents believed in the work above all else, but this acknowledgement means future generations will know who blazed the trail. James entered with the latest user statistics. The feedback from the initial implementation is exceptional, particularly from elder care facilities in rural areas that never had access to specialized memory programs before. Clara followed with her own update. The platform is learning and improving with each interaction, just as your parents' methodology was designed to do. 6 months after the dramatic confrontation that had shattered their original plans, MemoryCare was thriving not despite the revelation of its true origins, but because of it. The story of the Thomas siblings reclaiming their parents' legacy had created a connection with users and investors that no marketing campaign could have achieved. In their parents' old neighborhood, Malcolm and Diane established the Thomas Mitchell Research Foundation, dedicated to supporting medical innovations from underrepresented communities. The foundation's first initiative was a scholarship program for students pursuing careers in healthcare technology. Now, back to where we started, Malcolm said as he and Diane prepared for another investor presentation. This time, they were seeking expansion funding to bring MemoryCare to international markets. The conference room was filled with potential partners and existing investors. Among them sat Dr. Mitchell, Clara, and James, the core team that had weathered the storm with them. Walter Green was not present, though his firm maintained its minority stake in the company. Diane began the presentation with the same photograph of their parents standing in front of their community clinic in 1978. But now the image was paired with a global map showing MemoryCare implementation sites. Our parents believed that quality healthcare was a right, not a privilege, she said. They developed their methods not for academic prestige, but to help real people in their community. Today, we're extending that vision globally. Malcolm continued, explaining how the platform had evolved through feedback from diverse communities. The most powerful innovations often come from necessity, from people solving problems that traditional systems have overlooked. As they concluded the presentation, Malcolm held up the smooth stone with Persevere painted on it, their father's lucky charm that had seen them through the past tumultuous months. This was our father's reminder to keep going, especially when the path forward seems impossible, he explained to the audience. It guided him through medical school in the 1960s when doors were repeatedly closed to him. It sustained our parents when their research was taken from them. And it has reminded us that justice, though delayed, is still worth fighting for. The expansion funding was secured that day, with commitments exceeding their targets. MemoryCare would move forward into new markets, carrying with it not just innovative technology, but a powerful story of reclamation and recognition. That evening, the Thomas siblings returned to their parents' old neighborhood. The community center was hosting a demonstration of MemoryCare for local residents, many of whom had been patients of doctors. Patricia and William Thomas decades earlier. As elderly community members engaged with the technology, their faces lighting up with recognition as the familiar methodologies were presented in new form. Malcolm and Diane witnessed the true fulfillment of their parents' legacy. They found a way to help people directly when the academic world shut them out, Diane observed. And now that work will help millions. Malcolm nodded, watching as Clara patiently guided an 87-year-old former civil rights activist through the memory reinforcement exercises on a tablet. Different path, same destination. Dr. Mitchell joined them, emotional as he watched the technology in action. Your parents would be so proud, not just of the recognition, but of how you've expanded their vision. The technology that had nearly been controlled by the man who had once stolen their parents' work was now firmly in the hands of their children, and through the community investment model, partially owned by the very people it was designed to serve. 1 year after the confrontation that had changed everything, MemoryCare was recognized as one of the most significant healthcare innovations of the decade. The Thomas siblings were invited to speak at conferences and universities about both the technology and the journey to reclaim their family's intellectual legacy. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came in a small ceremony at their parents' former community clinic, which had continued operating after their deaths. A permanent exhibition was installed, documenting the Thomas Mitchell methodology from its origins through its digital evolution. At the center of the exhibition stood the original handwritten notes that had started everything, the papers Dr. Mitchell had preserved for decades, now protected behind glass for future generations to see. Innovation doesn't always follow a straight line, Malcolm said at the dedication ceremony. Sometimes it takes decades for the truth to emerge. But what matters most is that these methods, developed with care and insight by our parents and Dr. Mitchell, are now helping people who need them. Diane added, "This isn't just our family story. It's a reminder that behind many innovations are contributors whose names were erased or forgotten. By reclaiming this particular history, we hope to inspire others to examine the true origins of the advancements we all benefit from." As evening fell and the ceremony concluded, the siblings found themselves alone in front of their parents' clinic. The building had been modernized over the years, but the spirit of the place remained. "Do you think they knew this would happen someday?" Diane asked, looking at the commemorative plaque that now bore their parents' names and accomplishments. "I think they hoped," Malcolm replied. "Even when they couldn't fight for recognition anymore, they made sure to preserve the work itself. They documented everything, kept practicing the methods taught them to others. They played the long game," Diane realized, knowing that someday the truth might have its moment. As they turned to leave, an elderly woman approached them. She moved slowly with a walker, but her eyes were bright and alert. "You're Patricia and William's children," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am," Malcolm confirmed. "I was your mother's patient back in the early days of this clinic," the woman explained. "I had early-onset dementia symptoms. The other doctors had written me off, told my family to prepare for the worst. But your mother used her special exercises with me, said it was based on research she and your father had developed." A woman tapped her temple. 35 years later, and I'm still here, still remembering. What you've done, making their work available to everyone now. It's going to change so many lives." As the woman continued on her way, Malcolm and Diane watched her go, living proof of their parents' vision and perseverance. The confrontation that had shattered their original plans had ultimately created something stronger and more meaningful. The truth, once hidden, was now permanently part of the historical record. The innovation that had been nearly controlled by the man who had once stolen their parents' work was now helping communities around the world. And the legacy of doctors, Patricia and William Thomas, their scientific contributions, their dedication to serving underrepresented communities, their quiet perseverance in the face of injustice, would now be remembered alongside their groundbreaking methodology. As Malcolm and Diane walked away from the clinic into the Georgia evening, they carried with them not just the satisfaction of business success, but the deeper fulfillment of historical justice. Their parents' stone, with its simple message, "Persevere," had guided them through the crisis to a resolution that none of them could have imagined. The future of MemoryCare was bright, built on a foundation of truth that had finally found its moment to shine. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.